You're listening to the Integrated Business Planning Podcast, where we share stories of business transformation with your host, Lance Tyler, founder and CEO of ActionKPI.
Yeah, Baz, thank you. Thank you for joining the podcast this morning. Really excited to have you on. We got a great topic, a great couple of topics we're going to be discussing. I think one of the big ones, or the big theme today, is around, comparing and contrasting, people, process, and technology between, large enterprise and small companies. I know that you've worked in both, both large and small enterprise. So really excited to kind of speak or talk about that. But before we get started, if you could, maybe just introduce yourself. And then I always like to ask a question, what do you do for a morning routine? First thing in the morning.
Sure. So my name is Baz Rana. Current title is CFO. I work for an organization called Global Analyzer Systems Limited. Small organization based out of the Northeast. We do something called continuous emissions monitoring solutions or systems, which is a really interesting topic because it's all about the environment and measuring what industry is polluting into the air that we breathe as individuals. So, super interesting organization. You wouldn't think this technology exists in the Northeast of Calgary, and it's super impressive. And I look forward to having you out there one day, Lance, and showing you around the place and letting you see what we do.
That sounds exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to ask the question, we always ask the question of each guest, what does your morning routine consist of? Personal, business, crazy, not crazy, normal? Yeah.
Not crazy. I have a pretty simple routine. I like not to be manic when I get up. I'm usually up around 6 a.m. It's pretty straightforward. The first thing I do, I must admit, is check my phone, see if I've missed anything overnight. I spend a few minutes just scrolling through my phone, catching up with the news, checking on any emergencies I might have missed. And then as the usual, get ready, get washed up, etc. Now, the only thing I do, which I think irritates my wife just as much as anybody else, is I iron my shirt every single morning. So every morning I get out a clean shirt, I iron it. I probably spend way too long and irritate people 15 minutes ironing a shirt. That's something I've done for years and years and years. I iron my shirt in the morning. And as soon as it's ironed, I put it on and I'm ready to go for the day. That's when I feel that I'm ready, is when I have an ironed shirt on my back. Sounds strange. That's the moment in time I know I'm ready to head out for the day.
I like it. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good, that's a good habit. Yeah. I used to iron shirts when probably more when I lived in London, England. You're wearing the suits and shirts there. I mean, I still do that. Actually, I still iron my shirt, just not religiously. Not every day. So that's good to know. Yeah. Cool. Well, why don't we, dig in? Maybe again, provide a little background, your experience. Obviously, you had a very interesting career. We always talk about some of the transformations and things within organizations that we've done as, finance professionals. So why don't you give us, just an overview of your career and what led you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'm a native of the UK. I spent most of my formative years there in terms of schooling, and started out as a trainee accountant many, many years ago. I don't think that title exists anymore. It's probably a sign of my age by telling you I started as a trainee accountant. I spent a considerable amount of time working in and around Europe, and I actually lived in Chicago for 9 months when I was very young. In my career, I spent a huge amount of time traveling to some branches throughout most of Europe while I was still early 20s. I was very fortunate to have some great mentors, some great leaders who saw something in me and helped promote me through organization development, both myself and as organizations were developing. And I remember back then, again, I'm giving my age away here, but back then, ERPs and IT solutions were the big play of the day, and there were huge investments. Organizations were still quite manual in those days in terms of some of the work processes. So I was always interested in automating. I was always interested in removing inefficiencies and waste, and I couldn't understand why we took so long to do things and why we still used pen and paper, why we weren't automating consolidation processes, and so on and so forth. So I suppose that was seen as a positive by leadership, and that helped to continue to promote me as I moved through my career. But most of my early jobs were very large multinationals. They moved me around the world in terms of geographical locations as well. I lived in several parts of Europe. Last stint was in Switzerland for several years, which I loved, before moving over to Calgary again with a large multinational company to help them transform their organization, which was going through some significant challenges, both operationally, commercially, and financially. So that's been my career, because I always look for improvements and opportunities. And I just got to a point in my career, I'd probably been with these large multinationals for 25 years, and I thought, there's more than life to this. There has to be more than life to this. So I searched out, and I was fortunate to find a small organization. And I'd always wanted to be a part of a small, growing organization and leave behind an imprint on that organization. And luckily, I landed with Global Analyzer Systems Limited, fantastic team of very talented individuals with no corporate finance or no financial function. So I'm their first ever CFO. And I must admit, it's one of the best challenges I've ever taken on.
Well, I'm sure, like, from your experience at the multinational, being able to translate, what you learned to the kind of smaller organization, that must be obviously a big bonus for the company. And maybe just to kind of pick in, or not pick, but just like kind of dig into a bit of your experience in multinational. What were some of the roles that you did? Was it always in the kind of FP&A, always finance, I'm presuming, but like FP&A, sounded like you had a passion for automation. So what led you, where did your kind of path go in terms of the multinational experience, which we'll switch to like how that's helped the smaller organization too.
Yeah. I'm again very fortunate in the way my career has developed, because of some great mentors and leaders. Secondly, I have a simple rule, which is 95-5. And I've used that throughout my career. And to me, what that means, and to anybody I share it with, what it means is it's 95% about you as an individual and 5% from the organization, because you really drive your career, whether it's personal level, whether it's professional level. You have to have 95% in terms of effort, effervescence, call it what you like. But to me, out of that 100%, you really are the driving force behind anything you do in life. So, you've got to give it your best shot. Now, in terms of my career, I've done controller positions, director positions, VP positions, CFO positions. But what was really interesting in each of those roles was that there was always a sizable project piece to that. What I mean by that is I've been involved in shutting down and starting up operations, closing an operation in the UK, starting an operation in Slovakia, transitioning back office resources from high cost centers to best cost centers, i.e. taking them from Europe and putting them into India, for example, or Costa Rica. Large ERP implementations, helping project management offices develop. So I've had a varied career. It's always been growing the business commercially through business improvement, ERP implementation, restructuring, And that's always been a fundamental need for me because, with due respect, I get bored very easily. So I always need something to stimulate me. And this goes back to my school days. If you read my report card from when I was very young, I remember a comment from one of my teachers that said, if only he could focus for a bit longer, he'd be an amazing student. So I always needed something to stimulate me. I always needed something to challenge me. And these project roles always gave me that. And whether I was implementing a large FP&A improvement, it was always bringing all the disparate functions together to ensure that we, as an organization, could use data as an asset, because data is a huge asset for organizations. And I don't think that every organization utilizes data to its best abilities. And I learned, converting data into information is so powerful in that decision-making process. So that's what interests me. And that's why I was so involved in some of these projects, Lance, which allowed me to grow as an individual, but added success to these organizations ultimately. And success is obviously a very loose term because it depends how you measure success.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we had, I like this little tagline, actually. It's kind of reactive reporting to more active decision-making, right? And, and I think you just stated it there, right? And it's just like, how companies can use data to better inform decision-making. And I think both you and I are very, very passionate about that. And how would you say, just a question on that, how would you recommend kind of organizations or finance leaders, find those true drivers or KPIs, right? Because there's data and then there's information, right? And so, question being, how did you kind of isolate, what were the important KPIs and how did you avoid, for the experience or within your organization, analysis paralysis, and avoiding the noise, shall we say,
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it's true. You can quite easily go down the wrong path very quickly and not really measure the key success factors to the organization. So, in my opinion, and with any team I've worked with, it was all about underlying business drivers, understanding why it's important to measure a certain KPI or a certain key performance measure, and what the benefit of understanding that driver was and how that leads to better decision making. For example, if we're trying to remove cost from a process, what part of that process do you measure? Which is the relevant measure to ensure that you receive the information that will drive a decision improvement process? Because to your point around paralysis analysis, I've seen scorecards with 30 deep KPIs, and I'm probably guilty of producing those scorecards in my past as well and presenting them to management. And you can see the glazed look in everybody's eyes as you stand up in front of them and throw a scorecard with 30 KPIs on it, and they're thinking, okay, what's the message? What are you trying to get to me? Where's the storytelling in all of this? So it's fundamentally getting behind each of those and understanding which 3 or which 5 drive key decision-making in that organization. And again, every organization is different. We talk about profitability and cash flow being important. When you do those measures in a large organization versus a small organization, fundamentally different again. I've never been so exposed to cash flow management as I have today in a small organization, and you know this as well as I do. We talk about cash flow being king. Well, you don't really know how much of a king or queen it is until you really are on the line from managing cash flow at the minute level of detail that you do as a small business owner versus a large business owner within a public company. has access to liquidity much quicker, much faster, and much more openly than a small organization, like the ones we work in. So, that's a really good example there of, we talk about cash flow being important, but it's fundamentally miles apart between the size of the organization you're in.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, right? So like, even obviously there's industry specific KPIs, but then the size of the organization as well. Right.
Right.
And, as you say, cash is king, and running down those, exporting kind of cash, bank statements, right? Forecasting forward over a 13-week period is a critical move and very important. And I guess that's, and even off the back of that, with that cash kind of forecasting, you are pulling in those drivers as well. Like, hey, what's the revenue? What's the payroll? What are all the things that are, either generating or where cash is going?
So those are all key principles, and defining which of those you measure and how you measure those, and how you tell the story of those measures back to the business. So there's very good understanding of, I understand why this measure is important. I understand when it's tracking on target and why. I understand why it's tracking off target and why. I understand the part I play in that process and why. It's really getting behind the why. Why is it important to measure? Why is it important for me as a key decision maker in the business to understand that measure? Why and how can I influence driving that measure in a desired direction? And all of those are fundamental in understanding some of the key principles behind how a small or a large organization ticks, because they're just as important. They're just different levels of granularity. You tend to find that there's more structure and maybe more task-oriented functions within large organizations, whereby some of that structure, just because of limited resources, may not exist in a small organization. And the same person is doing 3 roles, whereas in a large organization, you usually find there's a dedicated individual. And because you're a dedicated individual, you tend to get a bit boxed into that organization, or within that organizational role in the organization. Whereas in a small organization, you don't have the breadth of resources. So you tend to find that you cross boundaries sometimes. And now there's advantages and disadvantages to that. And again, which side of the coin is the right side of the coin? Well, for a small business, you don't have those resources. So you do have to spread yourself thinly and make decisions outside of your comfort zone. Whereas in a large organization, you are somewhat tempered by, well, this is my box and I play within that box. And then the next piece of the decision making lives somewhere else.
Yeah. And just talking about KPIs, and this is just really a question when you're looking or deciding on KPIs, how much of that is wanting to influence behavior, right? Because we look at, hey, we're measuring this. Do you ever select KPIs to go like, hey, this is the organizational behavior change I'm looking to institute, and I want people to be more, say, focused on, maybe driving sales or cost reduction, and so how much of that kind of, let me bring the question back. How much of that, development of a KPI you factor in around organizational behavior change?
I think it's, in my opinion, it's huge. Because again, it goes back to a point we discussed a couple of minutes ago, which is you can create KPIs or key performance measures, and they have no influence over a direction of the business, whether strategic or tactical. So I think it's very important to understand the key business drivers, where you are today, where you're trying to get to. And then if you have a good appreciation for those key business drivers, you can then determine certain KPIs that will drive organizational or functional or individual behavior to optimize those key business drivers, whether it's cost containment, cost efficiencies, driving utilization, driving profitability, driving revenue, whatever it might be. If you can home in on those and get some very specific drivers that point to whether you're successful or not and pointing the ship in the right direction or not, I think it's hugely important to drive organizational behavior. And it influences resource allocation, because if you're trying to drive revenue, and this is a great example, we have a budget here, but previously we never used to measure our performance against that revenue budget. Were we behind? Are we ahead? Are we tracking well against certain revenue streams? Are we behind on one and up on the other? It's that usual piston effect. One goes down, one goes up.
Mm-hmm.
How are you measuring success in those pistons? So it's super important to understand where you are in that process. And if you can bring out KPIs that evaluate your point in that success curve, you can then drive that decision-making process back down into the organization. Well, those functions can then influence that and say, okay, well, we have these opportunities to drive revenue that we didn't think about or that we were postponing. But now that we know we're behind in this area, we're going to elevate that marketing pitch and bring that into Q1 as opposed to Q3, try and drive revenue in these areas. But then there's a kick-on impact of that. Is the rest of the business ready for that? Is the operation side of the business ready for that? So again, can we make sure that KPI 1 and KPI 2 work in harmony together? Because if we start increasing piston 1, but piston 2 is sitting flat, well, how do we ensure that the business is efficiently going to take advantage of that opportunity and we've not run ahead of ourselves? So they're so intertwined, these KPIs, and if you don't measure the right ones and you're measuring these 3 but forgetting these 2 go hand in hand, I've seen it because I've done it. A business can become off the rails very quickly because you again have allocated resources to KPI 1 at the detriment and success of KPI 2. And ultimately, that could be a negative impact on the business rather than a positive impact you desired.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Integrated Business Planning Podcast, brought to you by ActionKPI. We're passionate about helping FP&A teams improve organizational performance through our FP&A Accelerator program, which includes a no-obligation implementation of our planning software. For more information about the program, please visit actionkpi.com/FPA-program.
And it's interesting because I think we're pivoting towards the planning piece of this whole thing, right? And I think you just kind of alluded to it in terms of, obviously when you're growing sales, let's say we're behind our sales, but is operations, do they have the capacity to deliver on this, massive inflow of, sales that could be coming, right? And, balancing between, kind of resources, maybe hiring, things of that nature. And so, probably pivoting towards more what we like to, I know we've talked about this quite a few times, is around integrated business planning, right? Mm. So, how important, and again, business plan, how you plan will then factor in your kind of leading KPIs, right? So obviously all intertwined, but maybe give a perspective on, how you see integrated business planning. And I know you've rolled that out obviously with your large enterprise. Maybe we can touch on that topic, maybe from the large enterprise and how you see it now at the smaller, at your new company.
Yeah, I think there's a myth, for starters, we need to disband, is that ERPs or large FP&A systems are only for large organizations. I think that myth is something that we need to, I don't know, when I say we organizations need to break down, because I have rolled out large ERP implementations in large organizations, been involved in many ERP and planning system rollouts. But I think the benefits of those, the standard benefits of those, we introduce structure, we introduce focus, mobility of resources, speed of decision making, all of those pillars of success. You could apply those to a small organization just as easily. The fact that we have the capability of introducing tools to help our proactive decision making and planning into the future. Some of that's done on the back of a napkin in some small organizations. Still works, still effective, but not as efficient as having a truly dedicated planning system that reaches out into the future, plans for those resource allocations, whether they're people, financial, and allows you to visualize what you look like in 3 years or 5 years based on some fundamental growth drivers, whether it's driving revenue, new product development, cost containment plans, improving efficiencies, supply chain improvements. You can dynamize those into a planning system, see how they help at a very senior level and even a granular level, produce a picture of the organization that doesn't exist without some of those tools. And even in large organizations I've been involved in, they haven't had those tools, or they've had varying degrees of success with some of those tools. So we've managed to implement some of those and introduce some of those great ideas as to how the planning tool could help the organization forecast itself into the future. And we know fundamentals change all the time. Big key business drivers change all the time. So you need to be flexible enough in that tool to allow you to bend and adapt as both environmental factors outside of your control and those within your control within the business, because decision-making changes, management structures evolve, management teams evolve, and what was flavor of the day today may not be flavor of the day tomorrow. So those planning systems are great, but only if they're adaptable and flexible to your business needs.
And how have you, with these planning systems, how have you seen kind of collaboration in terms of, all the different business units or functions coming together? Maybe like before and after, right? Have you seen like massive improvements, post, and or any tips around that?
I think this goes back to the discussion we had around how do you define success? And I don't think I've ever been involved in one of these that has completed or been as successful as they could have been. I think where you need to start is you need to have a common understanding. Everybody needs to have a common goal. There needs to be congruence around what it is we are trying to achieve. Because without that, the change management piece in the organization is not impossible, but it's challenging. So I think you need to have those common features ahead of introducing any system improvement or implementation. And I think that comes through selling. You have to sow a seed and you have to sell internally within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about internal resource allocation in terms of funding, but it's having all those business partners on side with you, going through that implementation and seeing this as a positive change for the business. again, it goes to the why. Why would I put my business unit through this? What's the benefit in it for me? How does this remove inefficiencies? And how do we collectively tell a story? Without those fundamental pieces in place, it's very difficult for organizations to go through that process successfully. Because if there's one cog in that wheel that doesn't turn at the same pace as the other cogs on that implementation cycle, there could be, there's going to be definite negative impacts. There's going to be voices that you want to try and steer away from, and noise that you want to avoid. So without having everybody on board, and you never do, Lance, there's not a chance that anybody could say that everybody was on board through this implementation process, because it just doesn't exist. So it's that usual 80-20 rule. Can I get 80% of them to row in the same direction, and then we'll work with the 20% to ensure that they are getting their needs met. And we know we're going to have to sweat our assets a little bit harder to motivate that 20% through the project.
And I know we've spoken about this, but I want to raise it, is that, when you, and I think you've done this maybe once or twice before, when you go into an organization, you tend to look for those champions. If you're about to roll out a system, be it an ERP, be it a planning system, I think you've always said, and we've discussed this, is having the right people in place, right? And I think from a finance perspective and a team of finance professionals, it's really about those business partners, financial business partners. Mm-hmm. And, maybe we can talk a bit about, your experience with rolling out a finance business partner model, and how important it is to the success of the organization, but then even just being able to fully maximize the use of the systems and processes that they're going to shape. So,
sure, we have a really good saying in our business today. I love it because it talks about how to swallow an elephant one bite at a time. And if you think about that, that's any business is exactly the same. So I agree. It's in any organization, it's finding those pockets of success, and finding those individuals who you can quickly get to as your opportunities, or as your areas of influence that you can utilize to make any opportunity successful. So it's we talk about being a robust business, being an adaptable business, and without those pieces in place, without those drivers in place, you can quickly fall flat. So we've really got to go after those individuals who are willing to beat the drum and be the rah-rah behind the program, or be the rah-rah behind the opportunity to help us collaborate and be successful. And I always go and try and buddy up with those people very quickly, whether it's over a beer or somehow talking about their families, or understanding what makes them drive on a personal level, just to build a rapport. Because I tend to find that those relationships go a long way. And if you can just peek behind the curtain of work a little while and get to understand an individual and what makes them tick, you can, as a team, gel much better when it's not all work, and there's no play involved. We have to find that happy medium between working really, really hard every single day, making ourselves and the organization successful, but also understanding what makes us tick as individuals. Because without those elements, it's very difficult. It's that emotional intelligence piece knowing when somebody's having a hard day and just taking your foot off the gas. And another day when you know we can go the extra mile, you put your foot on the gas, then you go to those 3 or 4 people that you know can drive that forward. And it's just such a success, such a successful criteria to try and utilize is getting behind the process to understand the people, because they are the ones who are going to make this successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you said, it's really good. And completely aligned. I mean, from your perspective, are there specific qualities that you say look for in these types of individuals? I'm going to throw one out there because I think between you and I, we can probably agree is passion is absolutely one of those qualities. But maybe what are some of the other qualities you look for in someone who can really drive, who's got the drive and
Sure. Yeah, passion is definitely one. Energy. And energy is not just the individual level, but all the way through at the organization level. Change, desire to change, because I think everything we talk about is constantly evolving the business. So it's that want and need to change, but for the right reasons, understanding why. And so challenge, or being a person of challenge, or an individual who is willing to challenge why we make decisions. Why do we do things this way? How can we automate processes? Drive, passion and drive to me are slightly different things. But drive, it goes in a little bit in tandem with energy, but the drive to introduce new practices, the drive to understand why we want to be number one in our field, drive to understand our customers, drive to understand our internal customers. So all of these, to me, are fundamental in making a business successful, because without those, I think I talked about speed and focus as well previously, but you need all of those key attributes to be successful. And how can you home in on several of those at the same time? Because depending on where you are in the project, or depending on the day of the week, even each of those attributes is going to be at different energy levels. It goes back to that piston effect. One is always up, one is always down. So how do you focus in on those key attributes? And I think different people in the organization have different levels of those attributes. So how do you bring that collective team together to really home in on, okay, well, these 3 or 4 people can really help in this area. These 2 or 3 people would really be great over here, and this individual would be great over here. How do you take all of those key attributes from all of those several groups, bring them together as a collective, and really home in on ensuring that drive, that energy, that passion is there all day, every day, as you use those individual, not use is the wrong word, but optimize those individual components to maximize the output. And if you can do that, you're a long way to success.
Absolutely. And coming back to the contrast that we've been making, between large enterprise and small enterprise, do you see much difference between what you just said, in terms of, people and, do you see much difference, or it feels like it would probably just be very similar between the two, but it's just, you've got a lot more people to influence and kind of get on board in a large organization. And there's probably a few politics involved. Whereas a smaller company, there's probably some, but maybe not as much, right? So,
yeah, no, that's true. And we haven't used the word politics and bureaucracy so far. I was wondering when that would come up, but you're absolutely right. They to a lesser degree, they exist within a small organization, but I think the culture and energy of a small organization and the fact that you wear several hats, whether you have the title of CFO or whatever title you may have, you do wear several hats every single day of the week. So there is definitely differences. I think it's easier to maintain energy within a smaller organization because there's less layers to decision making. There's a quicker, faster pace to decision making. Now, there's a potential downside to that because have you given the decision making process enough due diligence to ensure that the decision is a correct decision for you? So I found that in a small organization, you're definitely quicker to decision making. There's less barriers to decision making. There's less bureaucracy and politics to decision making. There's fewer experts to rely on, so you are the expert to help drive that decision. Now, as long as you are willing to listen, communicate openly, I think that decision-making process is much smoother in a small organization to a large organization just because of the hurdles you have to go through in a large organization to have an ERP implemented, for example, or a FP&A tool implemented, or a change in organization, whatever it may be. It's definitely a much more elongated bureaucratic process in large organizations, which I do not miss compared to a small organization. And the great thing about making those decisions in a small organization is that you feel empowered to see it through from start to end.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a small cog in a exceptionally large wheel of a large organization where there's multi-layered decision-making, reporting, and multi-layered communication processes. Here in a small organization, that is removed. Those barriers are gone. That conversation can take place in a corridor between two offices, and it can last an hour, and you'll have a decision, and you move on. But it goes back to that early conversation we're having is how do you measure success? How do you intertwine that back into this is the decision we're making, this is why we're making it, but how do we measure success of that decision? Still the same fundamentals.
And I'd agree with you. I think I've worked myself in large organizations and siloed and doing my one job that I was responsible for. But in a small organization, medium organization, faster decision making. And I think the thing I love is that you get to see the impact of the decisions and the changes, and you can see it kind of start to end. Okay. And again, I think large organizations have this as well, but smaller, medium-sized organizations, there's a tighter family, I'll say family feel, where it's like, you're still close within your teams and big organizations, but smaller ones, it feels like a more closer knit, I would say.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I'm not sure whether family is the right term in my mind.
Might not be the right term, but
it might not be the right.
Friend.
I can't think of a better one right now, but I agree that culturally they're so different. You, as you say, you get to feel and live the impact of that decision. And this is not to say that I feel any less rewarded or any less attached to a project in a large organization to a small organization. As an individual, you always feel that attachment and you want to drive that project or decision forward to see the impact that you solved when you first set out on the journey. But I agree, in a small organization, there is we'll use family, much more of a family culture, family feeling. There's definitely less. You wear less bruises in a family structure than you do in a large multinational where, again, you're restricted by how far outside that box because you're now stepping on somebody else's toes. Whereas in a smaller organization, you're not so much so because sometimes those toes have never even been made apparent. Nobody even knew they existed. So you're stepping into territory that you feel you can make a change, you can make a positive impact, and somebody will say something and you'll feel good because you've introduced an opportunity that wasn't explored previously. So that's the benefit of being in a small organization. Mm-hmm. It's just so much more fast-paced. Decision-making is much more clinical, in my opinion. And the impact of that decision-making is easier to communicate throughout the organization because you're just dealing with fewer people. Yeah. You're dealing with fewer personalities. Maybe a little bit less governance, which is a good and a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But as long as there's a common understanding, it's definitely, in my opinion, much more rewarding in a smaller organization.
I agree. I'm gonna pivot our topic now a bit to talking about, obviously the buzzword that everyone calls AI, right? And I just wanted to get your perspective on AI, your opinion, and how are you planning to leverage it? Are you planning to leverage it? Just kind of open the discussion around there.
I think there's a conception around AI, concept around AI, which is, in inverted commas, fear. Everybody's afraid of AI. And our organization looks at AI as an opportunity, which comes with its risks and concerns. But again, like any risk in any business, how do you mitigate that risk? How do you ensure that you make use of the opportunity and not just fear the risk? So we've explored AI. We're a technology company, for example. So we want AI to be part of our solution. It's not to say that we've walked down the path to implement AI to any great degree, but we will explore it. The simple things like ChatGPT or Copilot, you look at those and how could you utilize those in your business? But on the same respect, do you want to be putting out information on your business into the cloud for anybody else to access? We're all fearful of cybersecurity attacks all the time and somebody accessing our intellectual property, which is our data or our patents or whatever they may be, our technology advantage. So why would you use something which is potentially exposing you to probably areas of governance that we could spend the next 3 hours talking about? But there's also the positive side of it. How do we use AI to expand our reach to our customer base? How do we use AI to develop our software, improve our technology? How do we use AI to talk to our customers, to meet their needs, to understand the path they are walking down in the next several years so that we're ahead of the curve of new product development? Now, I'm sure we could fill a room of people who would have different opinions on all of this and say, yes, but what about this? Yes, but what about this? Absolutely, I understand all of those concerns. And I'm just as fearful as the next person of AI. We talk about AI taking over jobs. Yeah, but other jobs become apparent because of that. We talk about AI introducing risks. Yes, but there's also opportunities for us to plug those risk gaps, and they probably existed previously. We just never stepped over them and explored those risks. Now that we introduced AI into the argument, we started thinking, well, there's a risk. Well, I would suggest that risk was already there. We just didn't trip over it previously. So we see AI as an opportunity. However, we understand AI also has its challenges. And in a small organization, we don't invest a huge amount of resource in understanding AI today. I'm sure large organizations do because, for public company reporting purposes, for example, their investors and stakeholders want to ensure that the business is on a solid footing. We will follow, and I'm sure smaller organizations will follow, but I think it'll be at a slower pace than the larger organizations. But we will continue to explore AI as an opportunity, but we do not have the resources today to invest in how AI can invigorate, energize our business, but at the same respect, what risks inherently will come into our business if we explore those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all. That's my personal opinion on it.
No, it's good, and I do agree. And I want to take this AI conversation to coming back to our finance perspective or financial planning. And I got an opinion on this, and I'd love to hear what your perspective is in terms of leveraging AI. I mean, AI is like, call it maybe predictive forecasting, AI forecasting. I don't know if those terms are interchangeable, but when I think about taking it from forecasting and planning and using some form of AI to help generate a forecast, my opinion is that obviously establishing a forecast anyway on, hey, these are our future kind of growth projections from a revenue and profitability standpoint. They're based off our drivers, right? And producing something like that, say in Excel or in a planning tool, that when you see the numbers, you trust the numbers, right? Because you can see that piece of paper, your model. But when you start using AI, you're kind of throwing it into a black box, right? And you're like, okay, this is what I think, this is what the AI is telling me, right? So there's no trust, I guess, right? Because you don't see it. And so I feel, from my perspective, in terms of maybe trying to build trust when you're using AI for forecasting or predictive, is you need to balance the two together. And you go, hey, here's my projections and my forecasts, how I do it, right? And now I'm going to test it against what the black box says, right? And I look at that and I think, maybe that's one way that us as, finance professionals can maybe consider how to incorporate it, right? Because then that can create some trust on, okay, I can see where this is maybe projections are coming from, but I still have my own opinion because, hey, I know my business, right?
Right.
Just wanted to get your perspective or opinion on, how, from your previous experience or current experience, what your opinion would be on that, what I just kind of stated.
You and I have talked about this concept of trusted business advisors many, many times, and I think that's a key term in my mind. And particularly as finance individuals, we are exposed to the breadth of the business. We get to see a significant part of the business that some other functional areas do not see. We have that sort of blue skies view of the world. If we take it, we can see from the top down into the business and see how those key drivers influence behavior and influence ultimately the financials of the organization. I agree with you. This black box of tricks that we go and call AI, ultimately we feed it with assumptions. We feed it with performance indicators. We feed it with whatever it is, and then we turn the crank. And ultimately, what pops out the other end is an answer. Without an understanding, without that fundamental blue sky view of the business, without an understanding of the drivers behind the business, whatever comes out, whether it's out of an AI tool or whatever comes out of an Excel spreadsheet, it's all built on formulas and built on algorithms that somebody had to put in there. And those are all built on certain criteria. So, you should be able to sniff. It's the usual sniff test, Lance. Mm-hmm. You can smell if it makes sense. You know whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. You can look at something and look at the result and say, yeah, that doesn't stack to my understanding. And here's why. I know that I did this and I did this. I expect it to come out in this direction. But it doesn't. Why doesn't it? So I agree, whether we use the AI black box for forecasting or whether we use an Excel spreadsheet or we use a wonderful planning tool that we invest in, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's whatever you put in is going to come out, and you should be able to smell or sniff, do the sniff test on those results or those numbers or whatever it might be and say, yeah, that directionally, it makes sense. So whether we use AI or whether we use Excel, I'm in favor of both, I think. But underneath it all, there's still a humanoid who's going to take that data and translate it and say, yes, it makes sense, and communicate that story back to their audience.
Yeah, that is critical, right? I mean, that's probably the most important part, is the storytelling and the understanding of strategy, right? So strategically, this is where we're going. Here's the drivers. Here's the KPIs. And then knowing how, building a plan off that and understanding and the storytelling. So
I think that's the fundamental piece. I think that's it's the business you're in, Lance. We have some great conversations. I think as a business owner, business executive, or whoever you may be, you know where the business is going. Well, that's what your role is. It's you're planning for tomorrow constantly. So you want to be able to churn that handle and get an answer to say, yeah, all these fundamentals work together, and these assumptions work the way we expect them to work. This is where we expect to be in 12 months. This is where we expect to be in 2 years. This is where we expect to be in 5 years. And if you can apply technology to those assumptions, it's way more powerful than saying, I think this is what's going to happen.
We believe that says this is going to happen.
That's right.
It's a gut check.
Yeah, it's a gut check. I think this is where it's going. But it'd be great if I had something just to sense check my gut check. And that's the application of technology. So if we could use that powerfully to direct the business decisions, to direct our gut check and say, well, 80% of my gut check was right, the other 20% was off a little bit. So if I tweak that 20%, I could refine the answer a bit more. I can get to the storytelling piece that I can then communicate to the board with some key financial and even non-financial information. It makes that decision-making process a lot more palatable for everybody.
I agree. Yeah. And it is the mixing of financial, non-financial data that helps probably marry and kind of tell that story even more clear, right?
So. Absolutely, because they go hand in hand, as we know, they go hand in hand. It's pointless producing. I think I gave the example. I've done this where there was 30 KPIs on a page, all financial KPIs. And when you first start doing that, you stand back and you think, what is it that I'm telling people? Where's the message in all this? And then you start to drill down into the KPIs and you you find that I think we got to 5 or 7, I can't remember now, it's several years ago, and of which 50% of those were financial and 50% of those were non-financial measures. And that's what told the story. And we could do that in 5 KPIs, and people could understand, the audience could understand why it was important to remain on target, whatever the target was. And if you were off target, why you were off, and what we could do to bring ourselves back on. So both financial, non-financial must go hand in hand, because without those, I think you're missing a key part of the storytelling.
Yeah, I remember as well. It's when you got all those KPIs where you're just talking financial statements and year on year, you're like, well, revenue is increased by 10% against budget. It's like, what does that mean? Right? Why? Right? And it comes back to your, statement before, just on the why. Right? Like, why did it change? What's the driver? Tell me, is it the customer that we lost or the customer that we just acquired? Is it pricing? Yeah, there's so many factors, but it all comes back to the business. And I think we know this is that, the finance, the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow are basically a result of the actions we take. And, it's the non-financial metrics. So whatever you do will drive your P&L, your balance sheet, and your cash flow, right? And that's what you need to focus on, right?
Yeah, you do. And I'm lucky again because there's some great coaches and mentors. But, as accountants, we're great at variance analysis. A minus B equals C. Number is bigger or smaller. And I had a CFO very early in my career who said, great, so you can do math. Fantastic. Why is that number bigger than that number? Will that trend continue? Is this normal for our business at this time of year? i.e., is there cyclical impact that will disappear next month? Why don't you think about the why and what impact that why will have next time you produce this variance analysis? And why don't you come back with A minus B equals C, and here's why. And going forward, we expect A minus B to equal C, and here is why. It's typical of accountants to do variance analysis.
Okay, I found this on the web for typical accountants. Check it out.
Oh, there's AI working.
Yeah, sorry about that. But why is A minus B equals C? And what do we do as an organization to understand that? Wouldn't that be a much more powerful explanation if you could tell us the why? And how do we influence the why rather than just the pure numbers? So I think that's what we as trusted business advisors bring, is the why, is the storytelling to that audience so that they can appreciate it and use it.
That is a great example. I love that analogy. A plus B equals C, and why.
Why?
I'm going to write. I've written that down, Baz. So I'm going to, if you don't mind. I know we're getting close to time here. Wanted to just kind of open it up, and anything else you want to share with the listeners out there, tips, tricks, or nuggets of advice based off your kind of long-standing career, what you've been through.
Enjoy the ride. I love working with talented individuals. I love going to work. I really do. It's because I enjoy what I do. It's make yourself available. Talk to everybody in the business. Give them the same respect, regardless of where they are in that organization. Don't treat people differently. Treat people with the same professional dignity. that you would expect. Learn to enjoy it, because we have a huge influence on people's lives every day, and the same the other way. You never know when somebody's going through a rough time or a tough time in their life. So be available to them, but bring energy. Bring energy every single day. Be prepared for the next day to be different to the last. You can't change yesterday, but you can influence today. That's my approach, and I always want to leave, not a legacy so much, but you always want to have a positive impact on individuals, on the organization. You always want to leave people thinking that you did something good. You always want to be seen in a good light and share your experiences with others. Development of others is such a huge win for me. I'd love it when somebody can say you left a positive impact on the organization or an individual. Not that you need that sense of fulfillment, but it's that sense of pride. And that comes through achieving your goals in life. And those goals in life need to be stretching you professionally and personally. So yeah, I love what I do. I love the people I work with, and I wouldn't change it for the world. So, but that comes down to you as an individual. Just bring the best version of yourself.
95.5. That's 95.5, right?
There you go. 95.5.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about 95.5.
Yeah, I think I realized how we get on. Obviously, you said a few things that I've, in my company talked about, just a couple of core values that we've started to, bring forward or realize. One is enjoy the journey, right? And I think it is all about that, right? It's, supporting each other, being there for one another, and then positive impact. I actually have those two statements that are the core values.
Yeah.
And I know we got on irrespective because we both have our opinions, but I can see it more. Basically,
Great.
One of the things you said. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you, Baz. This has been a wonderful conversation. So many good insights. Always enjoy our conversations. Next time we'll do it over a beer, I would say. But
well, hopefully we can do it over a beer when the weather improves and we can sit outside and have a beer at long last.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Integrated Business Planning Podcast. If you have a transformational story to tell or would like to drop some wisdom or share some insights about your experience or your journey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. So please reach out. Thank you.